Seconds to rock and roll. Everyone look pretty. All right, it is rocking and rolling, everyone. Good evening. We are live from both Tasmania and Iceland. Look at that, Jane and Jan already there, ready to go. You legend, you're back on the show.
How could we not be?
Oh, well, I actually spent a beautiful time a week ago with these two wonderful and talented ladies on the magnificent Bruny Island, which was pretty special.
Good evening.
So we've
We are
I thought that might
live
happen.
from
I've got to
both
figure it out.
Tasmania and Iceland. Look at that, Jane and Jan already there, ready to go. You legend, back on the
what's
show.
going on?
How to turn that off without turning the live show off? I have no other screen up. Or there's a volume button on it or something. I'm just worried if I turn it off, then we're not going to have a live show. Is it still going? It stopped.
Yeah, I think I stopped it.
Oh God, it was you. I was just thinking, I've done
No, it
everything
wasn't me.
right.
No, it wasn't me. I think it might have been Jane's microphone feeding back.
There we go. Well, as long as it's gone, it's right. So so the past week has been a pretty interesting one for me. We've got an exciting photograph to show of Luke in his absence. We're going to have a bit of fun. Lukey's parents have just rocked up and he's on an amazing trip and he's up chasing Fagus and Cradle Mountain at the moment, sort of half your luck. And he's taking them on a good merry tour around Tassie. And as Nick well knows, this is probably the premier time of the entire year to be photographing in Tasmania, as Jane and Jan know well.
Sure it is.
And I don't know, the last 3 nights, including tonight actually, 4 nights in a row have been some of the best sunsets I've seen, and they've just been going off their nanas. And we've had one of those perfect sort of misty mornings this morning with the soft light sort of burning it off in the wee hours, and you know, places like Derwent Valley are just lit up with all the colour, and Fagus is turning in different places around Tasmania. We've had a whole bunch of aurora action that Nick and Lukey have scored. If you look on Lukey's page, you'll see this awesome time lapse he did at Tessellated Pavement, which I've never seen actually. And Nick got there as well and made some magic. And yeah, sorry, Jane and Jan, we didn't quite get the aurora for her. It waited until just after you left. But there'll be more. There'll be more. And I don't know if we mentioned last week that we probably did, that Luke and myself and Andrew Phipps were out on the very, very remote Tarkine coast doing a project with the Bob Brown Foundation in the support of the cultural heritage on the west coast of Tasmania. And we literally flew out there with some Aboriginal elders and interviewed them and created a beautiful sort of YouTube clip that's just got put up yesterday. Yesterday also in all the major papers in Tassie, they had a big full-page spread of some of my images in support of basically keeping a certain track on the west coast closed that basically runs through, you know, probably the greatest living heritage of the oldest culture in the world that exists on the planet. Pretty much that area of the coast south of Sandy Cape to Pieman Heads, which has been closed for about 7 years. It's just one living archaeological site of these people. It's you take 10 steps, you're on a midden site, a tall site, a hut depression, a seal hide, and there's a contest between, you know, the votes for the local government up there and the four-wheel drivers who love being up there, and you know, and the damage that they do by being allowed in this area, just, you know, running through the middens and just destroying 50,000-60,000 years of heritage just to have a good time. So it's hiding up with politics at the moment, and it's election time coming up. So it's one of those sort of election issues. So we had a big press conference with Bob Brown and Nala Mansell at the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre headquarters on Monday that I was part of. And Luke and I had a whole bunch of photos printed up as part of the press conference as well. And good old Andrew did a brilliant job of pulling together a huge amount of footage to a short clip, and that'll probably evolve into a book project and an ongoing sort of body of work to support however the Aboriginal community wants to tell its story. And we did have one book already called Tectonic Country Culture Spirit. We talked about in the last show and we're looking at creating a second version of that, or a continuation of just getting really genuine integrated engagement with the community and what this landscape really represents and means to them in a kind of real and tangible and living way. And it's, you know, it's easy to stand there and just sort of go, well, you know, it's a no-brainer. But you know, having talked to some of the four drivers out there at the time, you know, they've been going there for 40 years, and they bring the boys out there, and they've got to shack up the road, and you know, they've got their own love and passion and for the place and their understanding of things, but they just probably don't have the deeper understanding of the knowledge of what's around them and what they're driving over, and what the consequences are of their recreational driving. Like, they're not actually going anywhere. It's just a very remote area that they can go and play, really. So I personally find it a little bit hard to justify, you know, a bit of recreational driving when there's lots of other places to go, and that have actually been opened up deliberately to give and offset the compromise of not being able to go down there, you know, and at the cost of, you know, the heritage of the oldest living culture on the planet. So it's a long soliloquy. I think I'll just check. I think I might have. Yeah, I do actually. I'll just share my screen quickly and show you what I roughly put in the paper. Actually, I've changed the ad and I've changed the wording of it. But this was taken out on the West Coast. So you guys see this all right?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is another Mansell. The Mansell family is one of the longest and oldest and most prevalent kind of Aboriginal families in Tasmania, arguably. And Nala came out with us on the first part of the trip, and she's actually standing. You can't quite see it, right in the middle of a massive four-wheel drive track going through some middens. And the reality is, there's no policing down there at all because it's so remote. It's a very difficult place to police. And the tracks, like, if you think about it, it's a really challenging place to drive through. The sand's really soft, and there's huge amounts of dunes. And actually, the easiest and safest place for them to drive is through the middle of the middens because they get more grip for their tires. So it's a bit like, it's a bit hard to sort of get them not to. And if you look at this photo on the top here, these are actual tracks, all illegal tracks taken literally just the same day. All these people were driving through here, and there's a huge another set of dunes right here. It's illegal for them to go through, and that's kind of just living evidence of, you know, and you know, there's lots of traditions around burials and different things in that area as well that are integrated into the landscape that the community doesn't actually share because I don't want people to know. But having that inside knowledge sort of makes me feel, you know, a bit more passionate about doing what we can to look after it. So essentially, it's not about closing something that isn't already closed. It's about keeping something closed that already is, to a very, very remote area of the coast that is really hard to get to and doesn't necessarily lead to anywhere in particular in terms of access. It's just about getting down there. So kind of proud to be part of that, and Luke is too. Don't normally kind of splash my name over such politically charged kind of material, but at the same time, you know, I've been working with the community for 15 or 20 years, and I finally got enough trust and been put in the position to sort of be their voice on some level, and I'm kind of proud and happy to do it. You know, that's about me, Licky. I'll let you, sorry, Nick, have a bit of a say before I maybe interject with a certain humorous story that Nick suggested I talk about. Speaking of Loki, let's see Loki. Where is Loki? Let's have a bit of fun with this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I caught up with Luke down at the Tesla pavement the other night. He came down to shoot the aurora, which was happening. I was down at the shack, and he didn't tell me that he was shooting with this brand new U-Butte, not released yet, Sony 14mm f1.8 lens. And of course, I didn't pay any attention to what he was using because, you know, I didn't really care. But he kept it hush, which was obviously what he had to do as part of his agreement with Sony. But the last couple of days, his family's arrived down from South Australia, and he's been very busily putting together a YouTube video to coincide with the release of this new lens. And woke up this morning and opened Facebook to see the most extraordinary photo of Luke on the thumbnail for his YouTube clip. So I'll share my screen and I'll find. It's quite lovely.
Lovely is quite the word. Let's just say it made a lot of people's day when this popped up.
Yeah. Okay. And you
wait for it. Oh, there we go, everybody. I love it.
Oh, dearie mate. He did say he had a lot of fun putting together the thumbnail, and
he did say that to me too.
And look, he Luke really does understand the marketing of social media as such. And I know certainly from the point of view of just putting together this show that Luke's really understood the power and purpose of the catchy YouTube thumbnail, and I think he's found the best one here.
What do you think, Serena?
It's pretty funny. I love it.
I've never seen him look like that, so I'm not quite sure where he pulled that face from, but it's quite...
Yeah, I'm sort of like, was Photoshop involved? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, it's a genuine expression, but I don't know how he's come up with that particular one. Anyway, we'll stop sharing Luke's face for the time being. Anyway, yes, we did have Aurora a couple of nights in a row, which is lovely. And I was down at the shack in the Tasman Peninsula, so I went to another spot down that way and got some different shots than I've got
bit of
before.
scrub bashing and disappearing tripods, Nick.
Yeah, so
disappearing tripod trick.
Yeah, it was a bit of a bugger, but the area that I accessed, you have to go through some pretty thick coastal scrub to get down to it, and it's particularly steep coming back up. And anyway, my boots came unlaced as I was walking back up, and I stopped to lace my boots back up and managed to leave my tripod there. Walked all the way back to the car and then realised I didn't have my tripod with me, and had to go all the way back, which was a bit of a mission, and then try and find the tripod in the dark in pretty thick coastal scrub. And I had to go all the way back down to the cove I was at and then work my way back up, looking for the area that I went, because I couldn't find where it was on the way back down. So I had to go right to the bottom and then try and work out where I'd come up from. It was a bit of a mission, but I did find it, which was lucky. But you've got your own interesting, funny story to tell.
Well, just to put Nick's story into a slight bit of context, his tripod's worth more than my car, so I'd be going back for it as well.
I was getting ready to do a line search the next day. If I couldn't find it, I would have been back there and certainly wouldn't have left until I found it. But yeah, the problem was where I left it. It was just not in a very good spot whatsoever. So I was lucky to find it in the dark. Oh, and my head torch had died, so I was doing all this via the torch on my mobile phone. That made it even.
Oh yeah. At least they're usable. I've done that plenty of times.
They are usable, they are. But yes, Paul, you want to talk about your?
I had an incredible workshop on Bruny Island with Lukey and Jane and Jan here, and it really was pretty fantastic. The forecast looked like it was going to get blown off the planet and that there was 10-meter swells. We wouldn't be able to get the ferry across to the island, and it was looking like, oh my god. And it just worked out, and we even managed to squeeze in an epic boat trip around the entire south and southeast and southwest corners of Bruny Island, which is actually one of the most spectacular boat trips in the whole of Tasmania, which is saying something. And I saw areas of state of the island I've never even seen. I've been down on the Friars on the southeast corner. There's a very famous Pentecost kind of boat trip on Bruny Island, and it runs from Adventure Bay on the eastern side down to the southeast corner of the Friars. But we had a sort of private boat set up, and we looped all the way around the whole bottom section of the island, and that area in the southwest corner is probably even more spectacular and more diverse than the massive sea cliffs and sea life that you see on the southeastern corner. So that was a real treat. So thanks, Joan Jan, for putting up with me for a few days. And then I had a little bit of a disappearing trick of myself. I then went back to Bruny Island a couple of days later to document a father-son rites of passage retreat, which is a very, very special event that happens sort of once or twice a year with some very, very skilled people where they actually invite. It's kind of like if you look at Indigenous cultures, they generally had an element of rite of passage where the men took the young boys away into the bush or out on country, and all different cultures have different ways and mechanisms of just transitioning them and testing them or challenging them or teaching them or inviting them to move into a space of young manhood. And we don't really have that defined element in our culture these days, and that's sort of, some people recognize that's a bit of a missing link, and it can be really helpful, and as well as having that father-son bonding time. So not only do they have that, and they had, whole nights out in the bush on their own and different kind of challenges and big, deep, open conversations, full circle, and around the fire, around all sorts of quite strong issues. And then we also, at the end of it, they have this meeting where the mothers and the rest of the community and brothers and sisters come and meet them at the end to kind of welcome them back into their family as young men, as opposed to boys. We're talking like sort of 16 years old, which is full of tears and stories, and was absolutely magnificent. So in the middle of that was one of these absolutely epic off-the-show sunsets, and I was went, oh, and I was way inland in a big forest. We were having the retreat, and I couldn't get to it except by drones. So I flew up there and got out there and just shot the living begigglies out of it, and it was incredible. And then, of course, I didn't want to come back because it was too good, and my drone's getting a bit low, and I thought, okay, that's low even for me. I better start coming back. It was only 300 meters away, and then my phone dropped out of the cradle, and it disconnected from the controller, and so the drone was just starting to land by itself with no controller in the middle of some trees, and I'm like, oh shit. And so I was like, oh no. And I was ringing up Lukey trying to figure out what to do. And then they're coming in saying, oh, we need you to do this. And I'm just going, whoa, it's my $3,000 drone. It's not actually insured. Ooh, let me put it this way. Like, DJI has a DJI refresh, which is what I do have, which is a form of insurance. But if you don't read the fine print, guess what? If your drone lands in the water, you don't get it back. If it gets stuck up a tree, you don't get it back. Or if you don't get it back, or it decides to fly back to China, which I'm here they can do, even though you're paying this insurance, you get nothing. You have to physically hand the drone back to them in order to get the insurance. So read the fine print on that one. You can imagine how many drones disappear that way. So it's a little bit tricky. But if you get professional drone insurance, it's a lot of money, and the excess is like $1,000. So by the time you add that up, it's kind of debatably worth it. You can probably get a secondhand one for the same price. So it's sort of like, so I sat in the middle. So anyway, if I didn't get it back, I was stuffed basically. And according to the GPS, it was actually in the water. And I was like, oh, I don't remember being near the water. I was back behind the trees, but I lost it for the last 10 minutes of it flying. So I didn't actually know. So I spent about an hour and a half in my bare feet and pants, just mangling my feet to pieces with a head torch in the water around these rock shelves, trying to find it at night, which of course was absolutely useless. And then I got up again at dawn in the morning because it was low tide then, because it was high tide then, of course. And I had to climb down a cliff to even get there. Another look for an hour and a half, nothing. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to bush bash around for a while, because my memory is that it wasn't in the water. So, and I'm literally like on my hands and knees crawling through scrub, and I'm taking photos up high trees, trying to zoom in to see if it's actually hooked on some tree 200 feet up above me, and I can't even tell. And I ended up just giving up. And I came back a bit dejected, and everyone knew what was going on. They didn't say a word. They packed up camp, and we're going to leave. And I said, right, boys, you ready? And I was like, what do you mean? Ready for what? And everybody marched back down there, like 15 of us, and went drone hunting without me even asking. And I was like, even just the fact that they were doing that for me was so nice, because I was volunteering my time. It was a totally unpaid job. I just believe in the cause, and it felt a bit sad to like offer all that and then lose a $3,000 drone for my efforts. And we still couldn't find it. And they're like, look, we've got to go. We've got to meet all the families and the kids, and the girls are all waiting. And I was like, oh man. And literally as we were heading back, one of the fellas kicked over it by accident, and he found it. And
awesome.
Like, oh, hallelujah. So, I haven't got it on me, but yeah, one of the photos I got back from that were just amazing. Like, I had to do 5-step increments of HDRing because it was so bright compared to the forest in the foreground and otherwise. But so anyway, DJI refresh number 2 is about to happen.
It was mangled then.
It's pretty mangled. 2 legs are busted, and yeah, it's had a hell of a life. I've had it for almost a year and a half, 2 years. It's been all around a lot of places around the world and been hammered to bits. But anyway, I'm going to get sick of my own voice, and I did want to acknowledge, and I wanted to thank everyone for acknowledging that in the chat, that is actually our 1-year anniversary.
Yay!
We've been doing this for 1 year, Nick, and so having one of the top female photographers in the world on our show live from Iceland is a wonderful way to acknowledge that.
Sure is.
We're very, very happy to have Serena back on the show. And it was very obvious from the word go that we needed to have her own show, if not a few, because not only because of her just latent talent, but her diversity and how she approaches the world through her visual artistry and the thoughtfulness behind it. I was reading through, I hadn't actually read through a lot of your Instagram feed in terms of the writing. I look at the pretty pictures, Serena. And today I was like, you know what, I'm going to read a lot of it. And I was like, oh my goodness, the amount of challenging thoughts and provocative ideas and depth behind some of the thinking you've got in and around what you're doing is, you know, and I knew it was already there. It became a lot more apparent and got me even more excited for tonight. So we're sort of letting Serena off the range a little bit with what she wanted to present. And Nick and I have both been very enamored with her recent kind of urban minimalist, kind of surreal, futuristic kind of series of work, which is absolutely exquisite and very, very sublime. And there's not much like that out there. So that was one of my first sort of thing that I wanted to sort of wave my hand up with. Do you want to talk about this, Serena? And she has a fascination with another sort of macro world, the world of fungi, and she does it with wonderful grace. Actually, that's a word that I think that comes through that particular type of work. And if you hadn't been watching the news, you'd notice that there's been a lot of rumblings under her feet over there in Iceland, and you know they've been dealing with big earthquakes and volcanic activities, and you know, and that's kind of influenced their lifestyle. And I'm curious to ask Serena a little bit about how that's influenced their daily life and how that feels living in a place with such a active tectonic kind of plates sort of rumbling around underneath you. And I also noticed about during this week, she put out a few interesting posts in terms of ethical consumerism in photography. And Nick and I and Serena were actually talking about it before the show, and we're going to have to shrink into the back corner for part of the show, I think, when we go into what sort of companies are flying the greener flags than others. But even though it might not be pleasant to hear, I think it's really empowering and important for all of us to get a sense of where a lot of the big companies are at and you know how they're operating in that world, so we can actually stand up and perhaps even challenge them to you know to step it up and to make our choices, because money talks really in this sort of economic capitalist kind of world. If people don't buy this stuff, companies don't exist, and we do have a lot of power in that regard. And so to have a bit of thoughtfulness around where and why and how we're spending it beyond just the gadgets and bells and whistles, you know, we've got a good hour and a half, 2 hours tops, to hour and a half to sort of bang around on that. But without further ado, unless Nick has something to add about introducing Serena, I'm going to let Serena have the floor and talk about whatever she'd like to talk about.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I have basically just been staying indoors in my apartment. As you can see, my plants are my friends. Basically, we've just had really heavy restrictions here. We're in our fourth wave of COVID in Iceland. It hasn't really gone away. Every time the restrictions are relaxed, they're tightened again very soon. At the moment, we've had a couple of outbreaks, and so we did have our restrictions relaxed on Friday, and they've now increased them again. So we haven't really had a chance to see anybody or do anything. We've been told not to travel around the country so that we don't spread the virus to small communities where there might not be medical facilities. So staying at home has been a huge thing. And the architecture photography kind of came about because I had nowhere to go, really. We could just walk around town for a bit, spend some time in the local park, and that's how the fungi photography came about. So I've just kind of reduced my footprint a lot. Usually I travel a lot for photography, and more recently I've just been going maybe 4 or 5 kilometers away from home, just staying really close, and trying to be a bit more creative with what I've got available to me. So it's been kind of interesting, a foray into architecture. I had no idea what I was doing when I started. A long time ago, when I first got into photography, I was into urban photography. So, you know, going into abandoned places and taking pictures. of buildings that were basically falling apart. But you don't really have much of that here in Iceland. And the architecture it's kind of a mix between modern and kind of cute. So I wasn't really sure how to work with it. But with a lot of trial and error, I've kind of figured it out. And I actually have been working on an article about how to shoot architecture photography, because I've had a lot of people saying that this lockdown has meant that they have been looking towards urban areas to kind of go out and shoot. So, and they didn't know where to start. So I put together an article about that. That's gone live on my website just last night. I was trying to get it done before today. So hopefully that'll be a bit helpful for people who are trying to expand some of their genres. And as a fungi photography, it's been something that's kind of kept me going through most of the pandemic, just because there hasn't been much to focus on. It's very calming to go out in nature and to actually be in the dirt, crawling around. It really makes you feel like you're part of this world, basically, and the pandemic just kind of disappears. So it's been really nice in that sense.
Serena, just going back a step, has your limitation been purely through the pandemic, or has it been also to do with the tectonic activity and the earthquakes and so on?
Well, the earthquakes, we didn't have restrictions in relation to that. We were told not to go to a certain area, which was it's on the Reykjanes Peninsula where all the tremors were happening. But I mean, we usually have hundreds of earthquakes a day that we can't feel. But then we had a magnitude 5.4, and it was quite scary, actually, because we were told to prepare for a magnitude 6.0. And you hear about earthquakes in other parts of the world that are magnitude 6, and basically, you know, all the buildings are razed and people die or are injured. And so I was really worried about it. And I basically, you know, took everything off the walls. We had a contingency plan for what we would do if we needed to evacuate. But it didn't progress that far. So after the magnitude 5.4, we had thousands of earthquakes that we could feel, mostly magnitude 3, 4, and a couple more in the vicinity of 5. And so a lot of the places that I did like to shoot and go hiking in weren't accessible anyway, because it's been winter. But we were told not to access those areas because of the risk of landslides. And basically, it's just very dangerous if an earthquake occurs and you're standing near, you know, a giant hot mud pot or a hot spring. So yeah, there have been some limitations in regard to that. But since the eruption has happened, we haven't really had any earthquakes that we can feel. There have been thousands of people streaming to see the earthquake, see the volcano. You can also watch the volcano erupting online. There's a live feed that's going.
I heard it had a baby.
Yeah, well, it's had several babies.
Several babies, okay.
Yeah, I think there are 5 craters now. It started off as a really tiny crater. So I've got a picture of it. I might share the picture, actually. Let's have a look.
Sorry if I'm steering you off your course there, but I was just pretty curious.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Can you see that?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, wow.
Oh,
yeah. So
how many drones have been lost out there so far, Serena? Has anyone counted?
Oh my God, a lot, I think. People have been doing really crazy things. I mean, it's the first volcano eruption that has been so accessible by the public. And so people have been flying their drones really close to the lava. One person flew his drone into the lava just for kicks. So yeah, it's been really strange watching the behavior of people and how they've reacted to this volcano. Because as we know, there's been another eruption in the Caribbean. And
oh, I have to admit, I did not know that.
Yes,
Oh, I didn't know
Where is that?
St. Vincent. And that one has been quite awful for the people that live close by. But this eruption seems to have trumped that eruption, even though
Like
it's
started a
smaller.
party.
Yeah. And when it first started, we could get really, really close to the lava. So this was on the second day after the eruption occurred. And you can see at the bottom of this picture, that's actually close to where I was standing. And there were some police around to hold people back. But lots of people were standing on that blackened lava, and a lot of people didn't know that there was hot lava underneath, and that you could actually fall through it. So there have been a lot more warnings now. People are a lot more careful, but it's still quite dangerous out there. And I think that's something that you don't really see when you're just watching the live stream. You're seeing thousands of people all around. It's quite a dangerous place to be.
Serena, my understanding at the beginning that it was quite a hike to get in there. Was it like three hours each way or something? And now
It took us 4.5 hours each way.
oh my god! And then I was like, well, how come there's thousands of people there? Are they literally all bushwalkers, or is it actually changed?
Yeah, well,
And now they can
people
get actually
seem to be really fit. So there were elderly people going out, there were people with disabilities going out, and here I was struggling with my hiking sticks. And basically every man and his dog was at this volcano. And it was just amazing to see the turnout. They estimate that most of the people who live in Iceland have actually been there and seen it. It's been quite an attraction. And
is
so now
the police still managed it all, like in terms of safety? I mean, because there's so many people going there now, and sort of like, and they literally the shots I've seen of people just right on the edge of what we're looking at.
Yeah. So when it first happened, there wasn't much policing at all. And the search and rescue teams were there to help out, especially because people were getting lost in the dark and being affected by the toxic gases. But since then, there has been a huge police presence. There are police everywhere because we've had the COVID outbreaks, and some of the infections were traced back to the eruption site.
Right. Wow.
So they've been policing it very closely. Anyone who flies in and is meant to go into quarantine and goes to the eruption instead, they've been checked and fined. So there's quite a significant fine for breaking quarantine to attend the eruption site. And now they've marked out a trail to protect the moss and the lava. So the trail is only a 1.5 hour hike. So it's even more accessible for people now.
Yeah, 4.5 hours. That's a big commitment each way.
Yeah.
It's a better part of a day of walking.
So people are flying into the country to see the volcano, even though it's, we have this COVID problem. Your borders are open, obviously.
Yes. So the borders are actually technically closed because we're part of the Schengen area. But that means that people who live within the Schengen area can still come to Iceland. So we've had tourism from places, from countries that are marked as red countries, which is places that have a very high number of infections. And so everyone is tested on arrival to the country. They also need to present a certificate of whether they've got antibodies or whether they've had a vaccination. And for a while, we had mandatory quarantine hotels, but then they found that was illegal in terms of human rights. So they're challenging that in the court now, but in the interim, they had to release everybody from the hotels. So with the infection has been spreading. And then we were told to stay away from the eruption site by the epidemiologist. But tourists are still coming, tourists are still going there. I think this is an eruption that's going to keep on going for a few months or even a few years. So there's a chance for people to see it in the future and for this to become a huge tourism draw card.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's caught global attention. I guess maybe it's accessibility that And the fact that people can actually physically go to it and get close and
Yeah.
walk to it on their own steam, it's sort of like, but it's just hit the ground running in terms of global interest.
Yeah, definitely. I've never been near a volcano in my life, and it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. I've got my husband to thank for that, because when it happened and he said, I want to go to
it to us, because I can't imagine either. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about the actual genuine experience of it.
Yeah, well, like I said, when my husband said he wanted to hike to it, I was just like, why would we walk towards something that can kill us?
Exactly.
Why would we go there? But he dragged me out there, and I complained the whole way. Once we were there, I was just like, wow, like you could see it on the horizon, basically, because you have to cross several mountains to get there. And it was just there, and you could see the lava coming out. You could see the lava flow, and it was just pretty amazing. It took my breath away. And once we got really up close and you could feel the heat, that's when it really kind of sunk in that we're on top of a geothermal hotspot, and anything could happen right now. It could swallow us in lava if there's a big explosion. But it was just this immense feeling of connection with nature. It was really astounding.
So is there a chance that it just could blow up big time there, and kill lots of people that are looking at it, or have they said it's safe?
I think the authorities and the scientists have said that it's pretty safe, because there was a buildup of pressure underground, basically, which led to this fissure eruption. So it was more that the ground opened up to let some of that pressure out. And now that the pressure is able to get out, we haven't had any earthquakes. I mean, we've had earthquakes, but not at the extent of what we did. So the lava is slowly coming out. At some point, it'll cool and turn into mossy lava field that we're used to. And there have been new craters where the pressure has forced its way through. But it's not really posing a threat to any nearby towns in terms of fast lava flow. It's a very slow flowing kind of lava. And it's contained in a valley. They think that it will break through that valley and move into the next valley, and maybe over one of the major roads. But it's not meant to pose any threat to the people living nearby, other than toxic gases and toxic clouds floating around.
Did you get any sense of that sort of toxicity, or in terms of breathing or smells, or does it smell sulfurous or anything? Or
you can't really smell it. So it's kind of, you don't realize that you're being poisoned. And so a lot of the people that have been at the eruption site, they haven't felt that they've been in any danger until they've started feeling sick. So people are encouraged to bring gas masks. And some people have been taken to hospital because of gas poisoning. But the people who live in the immediate vicinity, they're concerned about the livestock because the gases can affect the livestock as well. There's a lot of fluorine in the area that's seeping into the water. And the gas clouds have come to Reykjavik. So we've been told to close our windows and to turn our heaters up to have some of that air being expelled outwards. So yeah, it has been, it has posed a health problem to people here, but not to the extent that which they first thought it would.
Yeah, right. I'm just trying to get a sense of scale. I mean, I've seen a few photos of it, but I really can't quite understand how big that crater is that we're looking at in your photo. Is there any?
It's not super big, I don't think.
No, this was 200 meters across this particular crater.
Yep.
And the entire fissure now, I think it's a little over 500 meters, 500 to 700 meters. And the distance that we were from this, it was probably, I'm not sure, it was about 70 meters. You can get really close to it, but it's not very big. So you do have to zoom in on it for pictures.
Yeah.
I've got a video of it. I'm not sure if it'll play on here, actually.
I'll give it a go, see if it can.
Let me try. Can you see that?
Yep. Wow. Amazing.
Well, I guess, you know, we human beings have had long had a fascination for the real powerful aspects of nature, I guess. It's such a raw, elemental kind of thing to experience. I think that just probably taps into a certain part of people's consciousness, you know, that kind of defies sort of description, you know, seeing how crazy people have treated this whole thing and the extremes they've gone to get out there, and those poor drones is all I can think of. I've seen that many shots of them flying through the middle of the exploding lava and stuff. I'm like, oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Like, just giving it like a 50-50 chance of making it flying through, I would mention it at the very least. Anyway, we don't want to take up the whole show with it, but I think I really appreciate you sort of following that thread there, because it is obviously very current and relevant, and all of us down here are quite curious about it all. And I was sort of personally been sort of had you in the back of my mind in terms of your well-being over there, and you know, what's it like dealing with those big earthquakes in particular, in terms of, you know, unsettling your sense of safety and well-being over there. I didn't realize there was another COVID wave as well, so you've still got it all stacking up there for you, Serena. It's yeah, but I also noticed that there was certain times where Iceland opened up quicker than a lot of other places during the pandemic as well. It had a bit more fluidity with its borders. We've been pretty lock solid down here. And if you didn't know, we actually just opened up a border with New Zealand yesterday, I think, or the day before.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I've been seeing my mom for a year. Hey, Mom. So Nick and I have been sort of drawing over your web and work, and you know, I haven't seen really much like it, Serena. I don't know how you get so much variety out of a place, and obviously you sort of isolate certain features, but I think the presentation of it really stands out to me. And I'm going to ask you, as we get further into it, how you manage that kind of mid-contrast control, which really stands out to me as something that just is quite unique about the way you present this body of work.
Well, I guess I'll open up the architecture stuff. I'm still trying to figure out how to use Zoom, so bear with me. Okay. Is that sharing?
Yep.
Okay. So I didn't really start architecture until the end of last year, basically. And I had certain conditions in my head that I wanted to shoot in. And one of those conditions was for foggy night skies, so that I could make a bit of an eerie scene out of it and hark back to film noir. And we just didn't have any fog in Reykjavik. It's one thing that we lack. So I waited for New Year's Eve when we had a lot of pollution from fireworks. And I finally took this picture just around the corner from my house. And it was exactly what I'd been looking for. I didn't take my tripod out that night because I was actually struggling to breathe a bit. So I was shooting handheld. And so I had the ISO up really, really high. I think it was at 3,600 or a bit higher.
Do you mind when I ask what you shoot with, Serena?
I shoot with a Canon 5DSR and a 70 to 200 millimeter 2.8 lens. It's got image stabilization on it. And when I go out at night, sometimes I'll take my Tamron 90mm macro because I find that it has great color representation and it looks a little bit like film. So I think that was the lens that I used for this shot, actually.
I've never been brave enough to push my 5DSR that hard with ISO. I'm impressed with how clean you've managed to get that file.
Well, so this is actually a stacking technique. So I knew that there would be a lot of noise from shooting at such a high ISO. So I had high-speed burst on, and I took a series of shots, which I stacked using median mode in Photoshop later on. And basically that takes away some of the noise.
Kind of like an astro technique, sort of?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Luke does that a fair bit, actually, with his astro work. That's
yeah, he does.
I didn't realise he could do it handheld. I mean, obviously very quickly, but that's fabulous. Great result.
I didn't either. Like I don't push my 5DSR over at 800, so you might have opened up a whole new world for me.
Wow. Yeah, one thing that I've discovered while shooting architecture is that all of the techniques, all of the skills that you've learnt in nature and landscape photography, you can transfer those to basically any genre of photography. And you also, I think you have a step up with learning landscape photography skills, especially editing skills like luminosity masking. A lot of that can be taken into other genres, and even people who work in those genres don't know about it. So I think there's great scope to transfer your skills. So stacking was something that I used for this shot, and it basically yielded what I was looking for. I took several shots that night. This is another one, which is, it's actually maybe 10 meters from my house. This is the apartment next door. And they've had these, the scaffolding around for quite a while now. But I had been looking at it as something that looked like it was from a detective novel or a detective movie. And so I went there and shot it. This was right at midnight. And there were people looking out the windows. I felt like a bit of a peeping Tom, actually, standing there with my camera. But this was a shot that I'd wanted, and I was very, very happy to capture. You can see some of that haziness. That is the pollution from the fireworks. But also in post-processing, what I do is I bring down the highlights and then I increase the shadows. So I bring up the shadows and bring up blacks as well.
So you're actually changing the black point. So
yes.
So instead of just bringing up the curve, you're actually dragging the line up the side of the the black side, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
Crushing the blacks. I think that's what they call it, isn't it? Or
yeah, I think I'm kind of decrushing the blacks.
oh, yeah, that might be the, yeah, no, you're right. That's, yeah, the opposite.
Yeah. So a lot of it's actually done in post-processing, because if you shoot in RAW, what you're going to end up with is a really contrasty shot, especially at nighttime. Another thing that I like to do in camera, so my camera is set to shoot in RAW all the time and on manual. But even when you're doing that, your camera still has several different profiles that will affect the display and how you see your picture after you've taken it. So there's a thing called, in Canon, I think it's a picture style. And and in Nikon, it might be picture mode. But basically, it affects how the image appears on the back of your screen. You can change the fineness, the contrast, the saturation. And I kind of lower all of that in the camera so I can see a preview straight away of what I might be hoping to achieve in post-processing. And of course, those values, because you're shooting in RAW, you can change them in post-processing anyway, but because you've already taken the image as close to how you want it, you don't have to do as much editing once you open the file.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good technique with architecture photography in particular.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm one of those people that likes to use grad filters, and I like to see a finished shot on the back of my camera. So it's really interesting that you've sort of even taken it a step further, that you have this vision of a low contrast scene, and you're actually adjusting the JPEG options so you can see it live, your vision sort of coming to fruition.
Yeah, it makes shooting a lot easier because you don't have to rely so much on your imagination. You can see that image straight away. You can see whether it is kind of fulfilling your vision of how you want the picture to be, and you can tweak it as you go. So yeah, that's one thing that I do. I lower the highlights, increase the shadows, increase the blacks. And a lot of the time I'll tweak the contrast as well. So I don't like shots that are very contrasty, but I like high detail. So I do bring out a lot of the detail from shadows and in the materials of the buildings as well. So I like to bring out the concrete, textures of the wood, things like that. So this was one of my early shots. When I was starting to figure out what kind of lighting would be best for architecture photography, because I wasn't really sure whether we should just head out at sunrise and sunset like we do with landscape, or whether there was any merit to shooting during the day. And what I found was that with architecture photography, you can shoot basically any time of the day that you want. It just depends on what you're after in terms of a style. And so my favorite time of day to shoot is that moment at sunset when it's just about to turn into blue hour, and the colors are really red, but there's also some blue and purple in the sky. And I think that helps to bring out the character of buildings, but it also changes their colors. So if you have a white building, it'll take on the colors of what's around it. And that's a very interesting thing with architecture photography, because it changes the atmosphere, and it can really affect the narrative of your storytelling. And so that's how my futuristic photography came about. I started to realize, hey, in certain types of lighting, I can make buildings look like they're from the future, or that they're from another planet. And it kind of looks a bit like utopia. So I kind of latched onto that and continued with it. And I've just been shooting on really nice days because I like to remove some of that context that we're still on Earth. So I don't want any clouds. And I certainly don't want any people in my shots. I mean, that's just a personal aesthetic. And I try to cut out as much of the background as I can to take the imagination to another place. So I've got an obsession at the moment with concrete silos. This is actually an old concrete factory that was earmarked to be demolished in Reykjavik. And I think with architecture photography, it's really important to understand the history of the building that you're shooting, because it can help you with your storytelling, but it can also kind of change your ideas about your subject. So this particular concrete factory, it's actually on a development list for sustainability options. So basically, there's a group of people who run a sustainability architecture competition, and people apply with their ideas about how they would like to develop the building. And lots of groups have actually applied to redevelop this site into a green site of the future, I guess, that will be beneficial for people who live in the area. So it's very interesting to know about the history of a building. This shot, it's actually taken from a moving car on a highway.
Oh,
So
no way.
I knew that this existed because this is actually a shopping center that I go to a lot. And Opathatadaga, that actually means open every day. And I found that slogan really interesting. The typeface attracted me as well. And I knew that at a certain time of day, there would be these reflections on the windows. But what was really throwing me off was how to get the shot, because I couldn't really stand anywhere. If I stood underneath it, I'd be looking up and the perspective would be distorted. So I knew that I had to take this shot using a telephoto zoom. And there basically wasn't anywhere else to be except on the highway. So my husband was driving. We did a couple of loops, actually. And I wound the window down. I had the ISO set to 1600 and continuous high-speed shooting. And I snapped as many photos as I could as the sun set. And this was the shot that I got, which I was really happy with.
It's a remarkable achievement from a car. Well done.
Yeah. There were lots of blurry shots, and particularly pointing a 70 to 200 out the window is kind of difficult in itself, with the seatbelt on and everything. But yeah, this was a fun shot to take, and the way that I took it in post-processing was to make it fun, make it bright, and make it seem like, I guess, pop art in a way. Yeah, it was very fun for me, and I love when windows have reflections like this. So that was a high point of this shot.
What really makes it is that mirrored gradation of tone, from the lighter tone to the bottom of the blue in the windows to the blending into the tone of the sky behind. That's a very sophisticated element to that image. I think that really makes it stand out, and it gives it a lot of its dimensionality as well. I think it'd be a bit much flatter without that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I really like to work with, gradients. And trying to have that smooth gradient, you really have to reduce contrast. And I do that both in camera and in post-processing. Yeah, so that was a really fun shot. This one is another concrete silo shot in the moment between sunset and blue hour. And I just really loved it for the atmosphere that you could create with shadows by increasing the shadows, making them not so dark. That's a technique that I've really relied on. And I know it's a bit of a boring shot for some people, but I think there's some beauty to kind of focusing on the way that our society is built. I mean, everything around us is pretty much created with concrete. So I like to call concrete factories dream factories. They're full of our human dreams, and we think that they're ugly and disgusting, and we don't often think about them.
Yeah, it is an interesting way to think about it.
Can you elaborate on that dream aspect? Can you join the dots for us?
I mean, from wanting, your own house to all the built up areas that we have, the cities that we have and design, shopping centers, everything basically relies on concrete for it to be built. And so in that sense, these factories where they have cement mixed and then taken out to the building sites, these are the places, the sources of everything that we've ever imagined in the industrial age.
Mm.
It's really interestingly put. That's well done.
Yeah, I figured that was it, but I didn't want to assume, so I thought I'd ask you directly.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's just in my head, and I find it very hard to articulate. So it's good that you ask. So this is actually the University of Iceland, University of Reykjavik. I shot this from the car park, and again, it was at sunset, kind of golden hour going into sunset. And the building itself is actually a grayish white color, but because it was sunset, it took on these pink and orange hues. And it was really lovely to be able to capture that. There was kind of a metallic sheen to it as well. And that, for me, contributed to the futuristic look. Also, the angles and the fluid lines. So that's something that I look out for a lot in terms of subjects to photograph. For me, I look for futuristic design elements. So that includes curves, lines, things like triangles, spheres, like really interesting architectural elements. And then I look for a time of day to shoot them, basically. So this was with a 70 to 200 mil from the car park. Again, through a window. It was really cold that day. I think it was minus 13 degrees. Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of shooting from the car, just the temperature, the virus. I'm just trying to stay indoors as much as possible.
You sound like Christian Fletcher. He shoots a lot out his car window.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do from the car window.
Would you describe Reykjavik as being a architecturally, I can't say it, progressive place? Is there lots of great architecture generally?
Most definitely. There are different types of architecture, so you can see the different influences through the ages. You have cute houses that are the same as what you might see in Greenland and other Scandinavian or Arctic countries. And then you have the really modern designs that have obviously been influenced by a lot of the postmodernist builders and designers. But then there's also a lot of retro stuff. So I think, for instance, this university, I like to call it retro futuristic because it was built quite a long time ago, but it was how they imagined that a building would look like in the future. And they designed it to be functional in that sense. And so I think a lot of the architecture that we have is looking forwards and trying to conceptualize how we're going to be as a civilization in the future, and what kind of facilities we might need to sustain us. So in terms of the architecture here, a lot of the churches are very modern or futurist looking. A lot of the museum buildings, but residential buildings, they're just quite something from Melbourne, basically. This is actually a satellite dish at the Weather Bureau. Again, golden hour. And I found this really interesting because we spend so much time in the pandemic, isolated in our homes, but we've been communicating via electronic messages. And this is one of the ways that we do it. And so it became something that I wanted to focus on for part of my portfolio. Just thinking about our messages going up to space and then being beamed back down to us, just, you know, from house to house and from country to country. It's been kind of lovely to think about how we've been able to stay connected. And if this pandemic had happened when we were less technologically advanced, then I think we wouldn't be so connected. We wouldn't have so much support. And we certainly wouldn't know about what was happening in other places as much as we do now.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a very symbolic image, that one.
So this is the Pearland. It's a museum around the corner from my house. And it has a very, very futuristic design. It's actually a few large domes, geodesic domes on top of what look like metal silos. This is just a museum with lots of interactive stuff inside it. It's kind of like, if you live in Melbourne, it's kind of like the Acme Museum, where there's lots of, art based on the moving picture. So this is, I think it's an emergency exit that I photographed. And I waited for the sun to be directly on it so that I could have all the reflections in the windows, and also to have this yellow hue, because in the daytime, this building is just grey. So yeah, I really love how direct light can change how architecture looks. And this particular photo, I've often talked about as being a doorway either into or out of utopia, because you can't see what's on the other side, but what you can see is what's being mirrored back at you, and you're still not sure whether you're looking through.
It's fabulous.
So Serena, if you don't mind me asking, and feel free to say, oh, that's my little secret, how do you sort of push that tonality to such a midpoint from, extreme direct lighting with reflections and almost like shadows don't even exist? It's like, are you using luminosity masking? Is there a certain technique that you use to play and moving into that sort of mid-tone realm? Or?
Yeah, so this particular shot, I did take several shots. I did some bracketing, and I wasn't sure if I would need the images to be bracketed in post-processing. But the image that I finally ended up working on was one that was underexposed. So there were no blown highlights, there were no crushed shadows. And so in post-processing, I just brought up the shadows, brought up the black point, lowered the white point, not too much, because I wanted some of that luminous kind of golden effect. And then what I did afterwards was a lot of luminosity masking to paint in a gradient. So a very light kind of luminous gradient of yellow and blue to help bring out those metallics. So it's a lot like landscape photography techniques, but you have to kind of think about what else you're bringing out in terms of the light. So this is when the sun went a bit further down and the building turned pink. And this one was very difficult because there was a lot of light reflecting around, and it was very harsh at that point. So I think this was a bracketed shot.
So that's all still reflections there in the windows?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. It really does look like a gateway into utopia there. You can see the tree beyond it, and it just looks like it's an open space that you go through.
Yeah. Yeah, and I loved that there was the fencing up the top as well, because there was a balcony up the top. And so with the fencing, you can see through that there's sky on the other side. So it adds to the illusion.
I'm just looking at those two windows on the top edge of that series of windows, and how the left one has this crisp kind of orange framing and the right one just shifts into grey, and how sharp that transition is between left to right, relative to the underside of the walkway, which has the same tonality all the way through. So it's just playing around on that geometry quite a bit for me.
Yeah, and this one, because I'm really short. To take this photo, there was
You
so
look
much
pretty tall in the
distortion.
picture. Yes, Serena.
There was just so much distortion that I had to fix afterwards in post-processing. And so I really wish I had a tilt shift lens, but I left it in Melbourne. So I don't have extra money to buy a tilt shift lens at this point. And I've just had to make do.
Sounds like pretty
Sorry?
handy. Boy. You can't get someone to mail it to you?
I'll actually get charged tax on it.
Oh, even if you already own it. Wow.
Yes, yep, 25% tax.
Oh
So,
my God. And they're expensive lenses. Have you got, which one have you got? What are the Canon?
it's a 45 mil Canon. Can't remember the aperture. Very hefty piece of glass. Yeah, exactly. Beautiful piece of glass. I actually bought it after watching Eurovision in the early 2000s. They had a year where they used tilt shift lenses to make all the cities look like toys. And that was something that I really wanted to play around with, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
It's time.
So this is
we had trouble trying to figure out which one to choose, but I definitely led towards this one, and Nick let me get away with it.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, because I knew you were sort of wanting to talk about futuristic sort of elements, and as you know, the title of the show, like if you saw some of Serena's suggestions, the title of the show, we'd probably need a whole other graphic to fit it in. But so I kind of had to take a bit of free license on Serena's ideas and come up with a simpler title. But I didn't use the word futuristic because we just had it in the two shows before. But this image kind of spoke to that a lot for me. It almost looks like a spaceship or an ark, that could be getting ready to head out into space, or it has cultural aspects to it.
Yeah, I love this picture because I love that the design does look like an ark. It's actually a church. So there are elements of Noah's Ark in the design. And when I took this picture, it was at sunset. At the bottom of it is a very busy car park because it's next to a grocery store. So taking this shot was really difficult. I wanted to stand in a certain part of the car park, but there were so many cars going around. So I had to,
how you do it.
I had to jump out, take the shot, jump back. And eventually I got this shot. And I just love that it looks so futuristic.
What are you shooting at with the 7200?
5.6.
Oh, only 5.6, yeah.
Yeah,
so I out of that.
Yeah, I usually use 5.6 because it's more of an accurate representation of what we see with the human eye. And obviously I'm shooting handheld as well, so I can't go too low. So 5.6, this was probably at 70 mil. I was pretty close to it and I was looking up at it, so there was quite a bit of distortion. But when I processed it, I had in mind that I wanted it to look like an ark that was preparing to take humans and other animals to our new home somewhere out in space. So that influenced a lot of the processing that I did.
So you shoot quite a bit wider than this to give yourself room to work with the distortion?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I'll shoot wider so that I can crop and work with the distortion in processing. But a lot of the time, because I'm shooting with a 70 to 200, there isn't all that much distortion to begin with. Whatever is there is usually because I'm short and I'm looking up at a building. And that's not too hard to work with unless you have lots of curves and straight lines intersecting. That can be a bit of a problem.
So you kept the clouds in this one, Serena?
Yes, yeah. I wanted this one to be us on Earth going to space. And this was quite difficult to expose. Again, it's a bracketed shot. And I used luminosity masking to bring the lights in the windows back in while still having the actual building well exposed.
Do you use any particular type or style of masking?
Not really. When I first started to learn luminosity masking, well, first I started with a panel. So I had Jimmy McIntyre's panel for luminosity masking. And then I wanted to know more about how I could generate luminosity masks myself. So I started watching videos on YouTube. Piximperfect is a really good resource that I've relied on. And so basically just learning on YouTube, trial and error, I've come to have my own way of doing luminosity masking.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly comes through that there's a certain uniqueness and the finishing aspects of this body work in particular, Serena. Really stands out.
Mm.
And it sounds like way too much hard work for me.
This is one of my favorite pictures. This is the art museum in Reykjavik, and currently it's closed because of coronavirus. So it's a very quiet place at the moment. But I noticed this dome. I actually found it on Google Earth because I was just surfing around looking for possible subjects. I found it, and then I thought about when I might want to shoot it. But the light had difficulty getting through the surrounding buildings. This is actually in a very built up area, surrounded by lots of tall apartment buildings. And so I had to shoot this close to the middle of the day. So this was just after lunchtime. And because it was the middle of the day, it was very harsh light. The building itself was white and the sky was a really dark blue. And so the picture that you see here, I had to lower the contrast, lower the highlights, increase the shadows, and actually desaturate it quite a lot, and bring some warmth back in.
I'm guessing you won't have any examples, but I would be a little bit curious with a before and after, or raw versus finished. But I don't feel obliged because I'm guessing you don't have any prepared. But you've got
no, I don't. But
you've got my mind thinking about that.
Yeah, I've put up one article on my blog with a before and after.
Okay.
So I think I'll do a few more as I'm learning, and as I'm teaching others what I've learned. So it's yeah, I'll put up a few more articles with before and after shots that might be helpful for people to see what you can do in post-processing to recover a shot.
Yeah, I would have picked that for the end of the day. That last light just kissing the top of the building. You've done really well.
It's very convincing. Very convincing. And it
keeps keep in mind
it keeps that consistency with the aesthetic of your work too. But
yeah. Well, this is winter in Iceland, so we didn't have much light, but what light that we did have was very harsh.
Makes sense.
How many winters have you had there now, Serena?
4.
Oh,
this one was the most boring one.
Do you normally go away during it to handle the psychology of it, or to break it up?
Yeah, last year we went to, where did we go? We went to Austria actually, which was also in winter. But usually we like to go to a warm place. And last year we had planned to go to Spain because I wanted to photograph the desert in winter. But obviously that didn't transpire. We had planned to go to Australia. That didn't transpire. So we've had one of the most boring winters ever, just sitting at home. It hasn't snowed very much. We're very impacted by global warming here. And so we've only recently had snow in the last few days, and it's meant to be summer now. So it's a bit topsy-turvy here. So
but it also has potentially led to this whole new body of work that we're enjoying right now.
Yes.
The flip side for us.
This image is from Reykjavik Harbour. It's a series of storage rooms that are on this street, and they're next to an ice cream parlour. And every time we go there, I see them, and the green just really stands out for me. It's such an unusual colour scheme for a building. And so I've been trying to take this shot all through the winter season. but the lighting just wasn't right. And I eventually got this shot just a couple of weeks ago from the car. And this was shot, it was maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's a lot of sideways light coming in. And I love that it's created this triangle shadow next to the door. And because I was able to remove some of the context in terms of the sky or having people walking by or cars and things, I was able to create some of that futuristic feel with this picture. And so when I posted it onto my social media and onto my website, I talked about cryogenic facilities because when you look at this door, it's hard to imagine what's going on behind there. And anything could be going on behind there. And I think that's something that we often don't think about, what's happening behind closed doors. There's so much technology that's being researched and advanced in this world that we don't hear about because we're not scientists. And so when I started doing my research, I found out that a lot of animals had been cloned, and that really stood out for me, that there was so much that had happened that I wasn't aware of. And the only reason I was researching it was because I was bored in a pandemic. So that really stood out for me.
Color tones in that are just fantastic. Like the palette that you have, I just love those cyans in the top windows. Have they got some sort of covering or something, or was it just reflection?
I think they've got some foil on them. I think someone's been trying to reflect the sunlight out by putting that up there. Yeah, I love the cyans, and I increased the shadows so much because I really wanted to have that kind of otherworldly feel to it.
That's brilliant.
This is more concrete silos. This one is a recent one, another church in Reykjavik. A lot of our churches have these kinds of really interesting designs.
Yeah, have you shot that really tall church?
Hallgrímskirkja.
Yeah, that one.
I have some shots, but I haven't processed them yet.
Oh, yeah.
And they're abstract shots because everyone does the full-on shot of it. So I've been trying to look for a different angle.
Wonderful composition of that, Serena.
Thank you. More concrete silos. This one is one of my favorites. It's actually the cardiology research building in Reykjavik.
Oh, no. You wouldn't know it though.
I see it all the time when we're driving on the highway, and I had no idea how to take this shot because I only ever saw it from the highway. So I thought it was going to be one of those shots where I would have to shoot it from the moving car. But Casper's, my husband, drove us around, and we actually found a place where we could park the car and I could get out and take this shot. And I love it because it's almost as if the building is a robot with a heart. And you see the, I don't know what you call it, that air venty thing coming out on the left of it. It's almost part of the workings of this robot. So this is one of my favorites, and I waited until the light was shining directly onto the building so that I could have reflections and shadows. And you can see the shadows of the windows reflected from the windows onto the side of the building.
I grew up with a very, very similar building that I went past on the motorway every time my family went on holiday, and it was like a it was a tip top factory, which if you go to New Zealand is one of the most famous and iconic kind of chocolate ice cream things with jelly top on, and it had a very, very similar symbol to this on the top, and so it made me smile as soon as I saw it because it just brought back all the best childhood summer memories of road trips.
Yeah, I love looking for unusual things like this. There's one sign that I'm trying to photograph at the moment. It's actually a giant hot dog that's in the air. but I haven't got the right conditions for that one yet. And so that's the end of my architecture shots that I've got scheduled for here.
So what is your grander plan with how to pull that body of work together, Serena, if you don't mind me asking?
I am hoping to put it onto the digital art marketplace as a non-fungible token, NFT, where it will be sold digitally for cryptocurrency. So it's a plan that I've got. I need to finesse that a little bit further and to develop.
Can you do it as a body of work, or does it have to be as individuals and they just build up the collection with NFT?
Yeah, you can sell it as either as an individual piece of work or as a body of work. I want to put together a collection, but yeah, I need to explore it a bit more because I do have concerns about the way that cryptocurrency is mined and the effect that that has on our planet. So I'm hoping that some of the technologies will improve with time so that they'll use less energy, and that way we can move into the digital currency world with fewer concerns, basically.
Serena, do you want to use that as a segue into a conversation around the environmental consumerism, or do you want to go?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, I mean, ethical consumerism isn't something I've always thought about in terms of camera gear. It's affected every other part of my life. I can't go shopping in the grocery store without reading everything on the back of an item about where it's made and what goes into it. So I started thinking about it in terms of camera gear when my tripod broke. I've been using the same tripod for the last 5 years, and that's not very long. And it has recently become so warped that the legs won't retract. So I started looking at different companies, researching tripods that I might be interested in investing in. I was looking at smaller companies. So I did look at Vanguard, which was all women-led. And that really, it's something that I really support. But when I started looking into it a bit more, I found that it was made in Myanmar. And of course, we know about what's happening in Myanmar at the moment and what has happened in the past. And I was really concerned about whether my investment would go into funding any types of military conflicts. And so from there, it started snowballing. I started looking at other tripod companies. I looked on the Really Right Stuff website, and I was just about to buy a tripod because they're really good tripods. But I found a whole section devoted to hunting. Basically, they support the use of guns. They support people owning guns and trophy hunting. They make tripods to rest rifles on. And so this, it really struck a chord in my heart. I just couldn't support it. And I thought, if at some point I invest in something like this and someone questions me about it, I have no way of rebutting that. That's something that goes completely against my values. So from there, I started researching camera brands, and I was a bit shocked to learn that there are many camera brands that support trophy hunting, or sponsor trophy hunting, or create optics for hunting. There are lots of brands that have poor records in terms of workers' rights, and also brands that have not committed to phasing out toxic chemicals or other elements from the production of their gear. So it's really been on my mind. How did you find that
sort of information out, Serena?
Sorry?
How did you actually find out that sort of information? Like, where did you look, and what do you
There's
trust in terms of getting that information?
So both the UK and Australia have websites dedicated to ethical consumerism where people will research and post their findings online and share them with you. And there's actually an app in Australia for ethical consumerism where you can type in what you're looking at and see whether it's something that you want to purchase. So they have that in
I
the
have
UK.
heard of it. Do you know what it's called again?
I'm not sure. I think if you type in ethical consumer, it comes up. It's definitely on the App Store. So there was a whole webpage about it on the ethical consumerism website in the UK. It's several years old though, and they've only documented the larger brands. So I learned that most of the brands actually do support hunting. And there are some brands that stand out in terms of the fact that they make optics for hunting and sponsor hunting events. That includes Nikon, however you like to say it, and also Leica, Canon as well. In terms of workers' rights, there have been problems with Samsung. And in terms, there's one other thing that I look at, which is support of state surveillance. So I have a problem with things being made in China because I know that they do support state surveillance. And when companies support that, they're indirectly contributing to the repression of people, particularly of the Uyghur Muslims in China. So it's been hard to decide what brands I'll invest in now, but I think overall it's about being as much of an ethical consumer as you can be with the information that you have. So if you have the information, then you can make an informed decision about what you're going to choose to invest in. And hopefully where we put our money will start influencing how companies behave. I don't think it's possible to not invest in anything because we won't have anything to use as photographers.
Yeah, I'm certainly. I just downloaded the app actually, one called Better World Shopper, which is a starting point. I think I played around with it years ago, but it's when it first kind of popped up, and I do apply that with a lot of other things that I do in my daily life, and in terms of what and how I do. And I've been vegetarian for 27 years, very much partly to do with that. But I haven't actually applied that same mindset towards my photographic equipment. So it really struck me when I saw your post this week. They're like, geez, I'm a little bit out of touch with this aspect of what's a huge part of my own life. So it's I'll be doing a bit of homework for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic to talk about because we really don't think about it. And if you do think about it, cameras are one of the biggest selling pieces of technology worldwide. We have them in our phones, on our laptops, our computers, and we use them in our day-to-day lives. And we never really think about how that's contributing to the effect on the planet.
So we actually have a question. What tripod did you end up getting?
I haven't decided yet.
Still not. Okay.
I'm in purchase limbo now.
Yeah.
But I've been looking at a couple of German brands because they have good workers' rights records. But it's very hard to invest in a small brand because oftentimes they're not designed the way that you need them to be designed. So I'm looking at NovoFlex as a brand, and they actually create a lot of the macro gear that I use for my fungi photography. So I use a NovoFlex focus rail for macro photography. So it's a beautifully engineered piece of gear, and I'm really interested in their tripods because you can detach the legs and attach shorter legs and turn the tripod into a smaller tabletop tripod. So it's a very interesting design, but I am still concerned about the ruggedness of that design and whether it's going to stand up in harsh conditions.
You sort of make it a bit hard for yourself, Serena, ruling out lots and lots of things on different grounds, I suppose. But it was interesting when when we were talking before the show, and you brought up about Really Right Stuff, and I have a Really Right Stuff tripod, and it's a fantastic tripod. But I didn't know about the stuff that you're talking about. So you directed me to the right spot on their website, and it was a little bit confronting. It's very militarized gear. It looks just like a camera tripod, but it's got a gun on top of it, and the way it's marketed is in a military or hunting sort of style, and it's definitely worth having a look at. It wasn't something I expected to see, and I had no reason to navigate to that section of their website. It doesn't stand out. It's got a weird acronym SOAR on the top sort of menu thing on their website, and it's not until you click on that you're in this world of military gear. And it was very interesting to see. And again, I use Nikon cameras, and I'm not going to be changing that. But you're right, their optics are used for cameras, for bird watching, and for hunting. So that's an aspect that's. I don't know that you can convince them to change it because they've been doing it for so long. I don't know where you'd take that as a consumer to Nikon and say, look, I want to buy your stuff, but I'm a bit concerned about you supporting hunting. I suppose you could take it from a point of view of please don't sponsor trophy hunting tournaments or encourage that sort of behaviour. I mean, maybe continue to sell that because you've got a market, but maybe you could lobby for them to take away that other aspect of actually sponsoring that sort of thing. Maybe I don't know.
I think obviously they aren't going to stop making them because it's a huge source of income for the company. But I think it's a little bit like how we've managed to phase into electronic cars. And there's now a smaller demand for oil because we're moving towards electronic vehicles. If there's less demand for trophy hunting, then they won't have any reason to make these optics and this gear. So I think it's more of a rounded approach that we need to take in terms of campaigning against them making these sorts of items for use.
That's good point. It's opened up a whole can of worms in my head that I just didn't have before.
Me too.
And I thank you, and I also shake my head and say, damn it, because there's so much to think about these days with everything that you consume, and whether it be things that you buy or what media that you turn to, or what brand of politics you invest your time into. It's just another thing to fill the head, but an important one.
Yes.
I think, I mean, that having conscious buying has a potentially huge impact on the future of these companies and the world, and I think we owe it to the planet and each other to do it. And it can be confronting and not easy, and it might mean some sacrifices in the short term as well. But just in principle alone, I think it's important. And so I feel a little bit held up. Yes, I do practice it in a lot of other areas of my life, but I now actually realize I need to step up my game and be very conscious of it here. I certainly use the absolute bejesus out of my cameras until they're dying and hardly having to be usable. So I don't go refreshing anything until it literally is not alive anymore. So I get every drop out of the resources that have gone into the material that I use is a commitment that I have right to the very end. In fact, up until I bought my R5, my newest camera was 7.5 years old. And most people, and they kind of almost died like 3 times each. So it's kind of like absolutely milking them. Same with my car. I'd love a new car, and my car's 21 years old, but you know what? I don't need one. It gets me from A to B. It's working well. I service it regularly, and it does the job.
Yeah, it sort of brings up the built-in obsolescence sort of thing as well.
That's the tricky thing to get past. Like Serena got a new computer. I just got a new computer, and once you get past like 6 years, it's very difficult to be able to run the latest software or, you know, run the files out of my new camera or do any video work whatsoever. And that's a part of my job. So it's quite tricky. And I've been locked into the Apple system for a long time, and I do feel like you're being locked in. I got sucked into the early stage ergonomics and the intuitive aspect of that system. Early on, most people said, if you don't know anything about computers, get a Mac and you'll find it a lot easier. And I kind of have. But I'm also conscious that more and more they've moved into a throwaway technology aspect, and you can't change the RAM on a computer, and you can't change the hard drive space on your computer, and you know, and they even got caught out for showing that they were pushing their software through to outdate older phones on purpose, you know, for greater sales. So it was kind of like, ugh, what have I got to do here?
That's definitely a big aspect that we have to push back to these companies about. We have to be able to have gear that lasts longer. Some people would argue, well, you know, you'll have to pay more for that gear, and I certainly don't mind if that's the case, if it's something that's going to last a long time. I mean, changing technologies means that we want to upgrade, particularly camera gear and stuff like that. I mean, there's always the latest and greatest coming out. But, you know, if we think about, I mean, just things like vacuum cleaners, for example, down at our shack, we've got a Hoover vacuum cleaner that I reckon is from probably 1965 or about that time, and it's still
awesome.
It still works perfectly. It's not the greatest vacuum in the world if you compare it to the newer technology, but you know, you can go into these vacuum shops these days and buy a vacuum cleaner for $40, and then it just dies within 12 months, and then you've got to go and buy another one. And here's one, you know, that was well made in 1965, and it still actually works perfectly fine. And we've got to be able to repair our gear. A lot of the stuff you just simply can't repair. There's no one qualified to fix it. The company won't fix it for you, or it's just too technically difficult to fix, or it's built with materials that aren't readily available. So, you know, wouldn't be nice if something broke down, we could actually get it fixed. Like, you know, back in the 1980s, if your TV broke, you certainly didn't go and buy a new TV. You took it to the TV repairman, got the damn thing fixed. So I suppose I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Serena, on this aspect of pushing back companies to make things last like they used to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they will.
No.
But it's very interesting because Nikon in particular did have a case in court in Europe somewhere, I can't remember which country it was exactly, where they had pushed to make their items only repairable by certified Nikon technicians.
Yep.
And there were only about 16 of them in the country. And so that went through court. And they lost. They were told that they had to be able to outsource that. And that's a case that's currently going on in Europe in relation to Apple, that Apple must allow other people to repair their items. So I think we're going to see a lot of this in terms of companies trying to monopolize the market. And we need to push back against that as a whole. And I think that extends to things like Facebook, Google, all that sort of stuff. We do have to push up against all of it. Otherwise, we'll see a very restricted future in terms of our electronics and all the things that we interact with.
We've only got finite resources on the planet, and just by throwing this stuff away all the time, it just makes you wonder how much we've got left to use, and people keep talking about it. I'm just wondering maybe if we should maybe just move away from this topic now if we're finished and have a look at some of your fungi shots that you've got, Serena.
Yeah, I've just been sitting on with the last 5 minutes, like whether we let this conversation run out or we shift to that.
More
Yeah,
images.
I'll finish up just with a slideshow of my shots, I guess. Not much talking.
Oh no, well I'm very interested in how you shoot them. I was out trying to shoot these at the workshop, just thinking, I need some help with my technique here.
It's full on fungi season here in Tasmania at the moment too. It's
Yeah,
looking absolutely magic.
Yeah, I've been so jealous. I'm part of the Tasmanian fungi group on Facebook. And seeing everybody's pictures, especially that glow in the dark mushroom.
Yeah, the ghost mushroom. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
I haven't shot one yet. I'm sort of. If I find one, I'll certainly shoot it. But I'm not. It's one of those things where it's so popular to go and shoot them at the moment that I feel like I won't be original if I go and do it.
Yeah.
What's the name of the group, Serena?
It's the Tasmanian fungi. I think that's what it's called, Tasmanian fungi.
Tasmanian fungi, and there was a lady that she posted a whole bunch of shots from only a day or two ago that were just fantastic in terms of the variety. It's quite unbelievable. If you go into any sort of rainforesty area in Tasmania at the moment, you'll be able to shoot fungi until your bum's so wet from being on the ground that and cold that you'll have to go home and have a hot cuppa.
Yeah, there's an amazing Australian fungi photographer, and he was the person who inspired me to get into it. Steve Axford. Yeah, his
Steve who,
work
sorry?
on BBC. Steve Axford.
Axford.
Yeah, AXFORD. He's
Gotcha.
brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Leading fungi photographer in the country. That's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he makes time lapses of mushrooms and fungi growing, and they're just spectacular. So he inspired me to get out and shoot. And at first I had no idea what I was doing. I went out with just my 70 to 200. I didn't even have a macro lens. But now I've purchased a macro lens. It's a Tamron 90mm. And it's cheap for the quality that it is. It's a very good piece of glass. And I purchased the NovaFlex macro focusing rail to help me take those incremental shots. So I take about 100 shots for every one shot that I produce. And they're all stacked. They're all focus stacked.
This is where the Nikon system of automatic focus stacking comes into its own with fungi and that sort of thing. It's just brilliant. You set it all up.
I was talking to Luke about that, and he was, he's a bit like Miff that Sony hasn't done it yet, but at the same time, he was showing me a little focus rail, because you can get what do they call it, lens breathing or focus breathing, when you just use a stacking technique in camera and not actually moving the increments of the lens itself forward. This is where I got a bit caught out. I was trying to use the focus stacking in the R5 and using my macro, and I wasn't getting a tenth of the depth of field I was hoping to get. And I was like, geez, what am I doing wrong here?
I don't know, because I've done it fine. It works fine with a Nikon.
Does it depend on whether you've got it wide open or not? Like, you have to have it stopped down a bit as well, or?
Well, I mean, I did one just the other day on some lichen actually, and it was I took about 25 or 30 shots, but I shot everything on f14. So
yeah, I was wide open at like 2.8, so that's why I was.
Yeah, you've got to be really. It takes a bit of fiddling and to work it all out, but I would suggest you still need quite small apertures just to make sure you're covering all that every bit of focus. But
Does that mean you lose that kind of bokeh kind of feel that so much beautiful work has?
Sorry.
If you stop it down to f14, so much of the beautiful fungi shots I see have such a soft evocative palette behind them, which is from a shallow depth of field. Is that maintainable if you're shooting like f14 though? Like, how do you sort of get the best of both worlds?
That's why I focus stack. I shoot at 2.8 basically, 2.8 or 3.0. And then I focus stack hundreds of shots to keep that bokeh. But I think it depends on what you're after, really. Because sometimes
R5, so you're going to do it manually, the focus stacking.
Yeah, well, I use Helicon Focus as software to stack it all later on. But yeah, I do it all. I take hundreds of shots manually, turning the little knob.
Oh my goodness, you need to get an R5, girl. Well, you don't, but I've been absolutely loving that feature.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. And I light the scene using a little loom cube on a small tripod.
I was just going to ask you that because the last one looked lit.
Yeah, the loom cube comes with little rubber things, little silicone things that are kind of like a softbox. So it casts a bit of a colored glow as well.
Does it have a like daylight balance color temperature to it, or you can change the temperature? Or
it's got a daylight balance, but you change it using the softbox covers, which are colored.
Gotcha.
Just on that, while we're talking about it, both Luke and I use a light called an Aperture MC.
I've got two now, Nick.
Sorry?
I've got two now.
Oh, you got two as well. Aperture, APURTURE MC. They're a tiny little light, like a loom cube, but you can have any color you want via the app that it connects to, and all the white balance. You can change the white balance of the light. I reckon if you have a look at one of those, Serena, I reckon you'll be buying one of those as quickly.
Yeah, you can change the hue and the temperature and the luminosity of the light, all three.
Yeah,
I'll have to have a look.
Yeah, it goes from 1% to 100% in terms of intensity, so you can use it for high ISO astrophotography for lighting foregrounds, and you can change the color to any color you want, and the white balance to basically any usable white balance. It's fantastic. They're about $150 Australian on, or 160 maybe on Amazon.
I think.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's a brilliant light, but I thought I'd point that out because it's perfect for lighting fungi and that's
they're rechargeable and they can last a very long time.
Yeah. But yeah, that's very great. Similar.
And they come with a mini attachment to put on top of tripods and stuff as well.
Yep.
I'll have to research the ethics.
Oh yes. Oh no. No, Nick.
Oh no.
Have to give it back. Anyway, we're digressing.
Yes. So this is one of my favorite shots from last year. This is hair ice. It's actually a fungi, but it looks and feels like ice.
Wow.
And it's very rare to find. It occurs in certain temperatures, in certain areas of the world. And we found it. I actually thought it was a bit of sheep wool on it that had been caught on the branch. So this was very hard to take a picture of without damaging it, and even being close to it and having my breath on it made it melt. So,
oh wow!
Goodness. Wow!
Yeah,
it's incredible.
This was one of my first pictures. I had never seen Amanita muscaria before, and it's such a fairy tale mushroom, so it's lovely to find.
Absolutely, Hansel and Gretel all the way.
These ones were in the forest nearby, and I just loved the colors of them. And this was when I didn't have my focusing rail yet, so I was still focusing everything by manually changing the focal length. It was very difficult. This one took many hundreds of pictures. And this was one of the most interesting pictures that I took last year, that has generated a lot of interest. So this is, I think it's called the horsehair parachute. It's a fungi that grows in dead matter. And you'll see that there are filaments down the bottom. They're actually the root of the fungus, reaching through the tree branch, trying to make its way down to the ground. And these were very tiny, so they were maybe almost as thin as my hair.
No way.
Mm.
So obviously you've got to have pretty still conditions for this sort of photography generally.
Yes.
And do you go for overcast lighting, I assume, or it just depends on where you are, or you overpower it with the cube?
Yeah. When you're in the forest, it's very overcast anyway. It's very dark, which is why I bring the lighting along. And I usually go for side lighting to get some of the shadow onto the fungi itself. But it can be difficult because it's so dark in the forest, and sometimes the one lume cube isn't enough. And so sometimes I have to use my phone as well for some fill lighting.
I gotcha. Yeah.
And this one is lichen and fungi.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's all of those. But I did want to share.
The colours match between the two.
Yeah. I did want to share some of the landscape photos that I've taken in the past year as well, since the last time. So this is a geothermal area out near Thingvellir, the national park here in Reykjavik. So this shot was taken during summer, and there's an image here. These two images here, this is the same area basically, and this is during winter.
Mm. Mm.
So this is also another geothermal area. It's one of my favorite ones, but it's hard to get to in winter because it's all snow. We have lots of these geodesic domes around. I think that they're actually covering drill holes for geothermal water.
Gotcha.
And this is one of my favorite shots. It's taken on a very long hike during autumn, and it was so cold and my legs were almost falling off, but it was worth it to get this shot. And this is one that you don't often see coming out of Iceland, so that's nice as well.
It's almost got a Scotland sort of feel to it, hasn't it?
Definitely. A lot of Iceland looks like Scotland. And this was on a camping trip. You'll see that I felt that it looked a bit like Australia, but you might not see that.
Yeah, it's sort of a Warrumbungle sort of feel to it a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, the vegetation looks like Fagus, deciduous beech as well. It's got the same sort of leaf sort of density to it. So yeah, very much like a big field of Fagus here in Tassie.
Yeah, we went camping here and it felt a little bit like home. And more from Thingvellir. And
yeah, I found it a bit concerning. You're just sharing that there's been so little snow this winter.
Yeah, there hasn't been very much at all, and it's just felt kind of strange, really. It feels like we're in winter now when it's supposed to be summer.
Mm. Well, we had winter yesterday and summer again today.
Oh.
Yesterday was 4 degrees and I don't know, today got back up to about 17 or something.
Gosh, that's summer for us.
What, the 4?
Yeah.
Oh God.
And I guess we'll finish up with some of my puffin pictures from
yes.
last year. It's been very grey here, so very grey puffin shots. So we're waiting for them to return. They'll be back in the middle of summer to nest.
How do you sort of describe the personality of these birds?
They're so cute. They're so quirky. The ones that, so they do have different personalities. These ones we photographed in the East Fjords. So they're a little bit weary of humans, but I've photographed them in the north, in the West Fjords, where they're super friendly and you can get so close to them that you don't even need your telephoto. You just need a wide angle because they're right next to you. They're curious.
So cool.
Yeah, they want to know about you. They want to know why you're there. But the ones in the East Fjords, they're very worried about you and they want you to stay away. So,
What you got on its beak there?
it's got some fish that it's caught.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure if I can zoom in on here. No, I can't.
Amazing colours.
Yeah, they're so cute. So that was a little bit of joy that came out of the pandemic, which we're still in.
You say that, but my trip to Scotland was cancelled because of the pandemic, so I didn't get to see any puffins.
Oh.
A bit sad. That's like first world problems.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we've got it as good, if not better, than anyone in the world down here.
Certainly do. Yeah,
it's we're a little bit of Tassie's already a little bit of a bubble, but Australia is even a bigger bubble again relative to what's going on the planet. And I think we've, we're not ungrateful for it, but I don't think a lot of us carry a very genuine awareness for the kind of massive lifestyle changes and influences that are happening in everyday life for hundreds of millions of people around the world. India, and I hardly even know what's going on in Africa, because it's just under the radar for our media, generally speaking. India is definitely just having such a hard time. And, it sort of hit the radar, I think, because Europe got hit so hard, and that's kind of the center of a lot of the economic world to some extent, and media. So couldn't put that place under the carpet, but yeah, we'll see how it all rolls out. We definitely got a few hiccups in terms of the whole vaccination process. I think things are going to be a lot slower and maybe less, it's more of a management tool, I think, rather than a cure. That's becoming clearer and clearer by the day. But anyway, that's a whole show in itself. So let's end with happy puffin shots. Yay! That was such a nice touch, Serena. I'm really grateful you took some time out for us, and we've been wanting to have you back quite a long time already. Very, very blessed to have you on our 1 year anniversary. Whoever thought we'd get this far? We were going to do 6 shows, and this is number 46.
Yeah.
So Dex, our designer, has been super excited, and he's really pumped up for our 50th show, and we're looking at doing a Peter Dravoskis show, who to Luke and myself and Nick is probably one of the most iconic photographers on the planet from a landscape point of view, and particularly dear to us Tasmanian-based folk. And we're looking at trying to pull in some of the great masters that spent time with him personally as well to come on the show. We just have to get the timing right and see who's available when and up for it. But yeah, that's pretty exciting. Looking towards that one.
Yeah.
Thanks for waiting patiently at the beginning of the show while we were rambling on about our own little stories, Serena. I appreciated that.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun to chat with you guys, and good to see everyone's little faces up on the screen as well. I didn't know that.
We got some stayers that we've got some behind the background, and we've got our regulars that get right up there and let us know they're there. And thanks for such a beautiful variety of work, Serena. I hope you've enjoyed sort of celebrating and sharing some of the other genres and styles of work that you do. That I do truckloads of different genres, and most people don't even know. So it's kind of interesting aspect to when I get the opportunity to actually share the others that can actually surprise people, and I find it really enjoyable to just celebrate diversity. Again, you're giving us a bit to think about as well. Not all of it easy. Blessings on handling the tectonic hoo-ha and the pandemic aspects you're going through. I didn't actually realize that about and now I've got to look up the Caribbean. I didn't even know there was an eruption there. So I'm a little bit embarrassed about that, but little old Tassie bubble.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we can do to help you get that lens back, let us know.
Good shift.
I can imagine you put that to amazing use. So I guess you might have to put it out there if anyone's traveling away, which won't be soon, but it could be happening. You should have got Chris Burkhardt to bring it over for you. He's just been over in Iceland, I don't know how many times now. He just rode across it on bicycles through the snow. Crazy, man.
Yeah.
Well, you keep well, Serena, and keep doing your magic. And when you bring out a workshop on how to do that mid-tone, the velocity masking, let me know, because I'll be all over it, because I don't have a clue.
I might have to record a video.
Yeah, it's
Let's start a YouTube channel.
It's a really standout aspect of that particular body of work, just how beautifully you handle the mid-tone tonality in particular. It's just, and if anyone knows anything about managing gradients with consistency, and the fact that she's presented that to us across a massive diversity of the kind of exposure conditions she was doing it in, from like bright sunlight to huge reflections, and to still create that consistency thematically through the work and aesthetically is a real testament. I know enough to know that that's a huge commitment and a lot of work and a lot of foresight to be able to manage a consistent body of work around such different conditions.
Yeah.
Beautifully done. Keep it up, please.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I Luke can take his hat off to me for technically pulling off the show because
No, well done.
and being actually fairly well organised tonight and ahead of time. So let's give myself a little pat on the back there.
Good work, Paulie.
And thanks, Nick, for taking time out of your holiday to come on the show too, man. I actually thought I was going to be on my own there for a while. So
I was just sort of hedging my bets about whether I was going to be away or not. But I'll be away in a couple of days, I think, and who knows what will happen next week.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just enjoy, Nick. You work hard, and this is the premier time of year to shoot. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Serena.
Serena, keep well. Look after yourself. Love to
everybody.
all your homeland and all that everyone's going through over there. We'll be thinking of you.
Can't wait to get back.
Awesome.
Yeah. I know. I know you've been feeling that way for a while. I've been feeling the same about getting home for me too. Well, keep well, everyone, and we will see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.
Good night.